It's a Wednesday edition of Locked On Grizzlies, and Damichael Cole is breaking down Ja Morant MVP odds. We're looking into what is a likely next move for the Memphis Grizzlies roster-wise, and we're giving some love to Vince Williams Jr. on Josh Lloyd's Locked On Fantasy Basketball podcast. All that and more on this episode of Locked On Grizzlies. Let's lock in.
You are Locked On Grizzlies, your daily Memphis Grizzlies podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, dear listener, dear viewer. Thank you so much for being with myself and my co-host, Michael Cole. Once again, it is I, Ja Mullinax, and this is Locked On Grizzlies. Today's episode of Locked On Grizzlies is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more as the Olympics wind down. Sports stop sporting the way that we want them to over the next few weeks. But this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone, every day, all summer long. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts as proud members of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team each and every single day. Like, comment, rate, review, subscribe. Check us out on YouTube. We have a wonderful community of commenters and everydayers that have made us a part of their Memphis Grizzlies and NBA content consumption each and every time that an episode drops. But consider subscribing on Apple, on Spotify, on Amazon, anywhere you get audio podcasts, as well as video or visual with YouTube. I don't know about you, partner, but my home and where I work is about 25 minutes apart. So I get caught up on my podcast. Like I listen to the show whenever it comes out. If it's a Damichael solo episode or both of us, or whatever. It is kind of awkward when I listen to myself. I feel that's kind of strange. But I do listen to the show just to make sure we're editing it well and everything's going good. It's campaign season and I'm a government teacher, so I listen to various campaign podcasts. No, I'm not going to tell you what I think of them. But just my point is I listen to a lot of audio on the go. And, you know, Locked On Grizzlies is a great show to consume. I'm biased, but Locked On Grizzlies is a great show to consume wherever you get your audio podcast, as well as, of course, on YouTube. Damichael Cole, thank goodness for you, sir, because you are out there fighting the good fight, still giving us content to discuss on this this very podcast here. So much of what we're going to discuss on today's show, again, comes from your remarkable work over at the Commercial Appeal. Damichael is the Memphis Grizzlies beat writer for that publication, an award-winning Memphis Grizzlies beat writer for that publication. And we're going to pick and pull from a couple of different pieces that you've done recently, Damichael. And I thought it would be fun to lead off with Ja Morant, because why wouldn't you lead off with the franchise cornerstone? I said on the Josh Lloyd podcast, which we'll talk more about later in the show, none of this matters if Ja Morant doesn't play, right? We can break down Vince Williams Jr. We can talk about Exhibit 10 contracts. We can even talk about Desmond Bane and Jaren Jackson Jr. If Ja Morant doesn't play to the level that he is capable of and that he's paid to play to, nothing else matters for the Memphis Grizzlies. So more often than not, it makes sense to start off with Ja Morant. And you covered his current MVP odds, and I thought it was very interesting. But I don't want to kill the lead. I'll happily cede the floor to you, dear sir.
Yeah. So if you look at it right now, he's 10th. He's 10th in MVP odds, and quite frankly, I think it's a solid spot.
Yeah,
you know, it's a solid spot overall. There are a couple players in there. You got like your Zion Williamsons and Victor Wembanyama's, and I'm like, hold up now. Forget what Ja brings to the table. But all things considered, Ja, where he is right now in the MVP voting, seems kind of fair. Like I don't know if I would list it as too low or too high. But here's the thing, though. I will say if you're predicting what kind of I'm predicting, and we'll talk deeper about this as the year goes on. But in the simplest form, I think this is a great season if Ja's healthy. I think it's a mediocre season if Ja misses time. And you might want to just say, duh, but I don't think it's a duh answer because of the fact that 2 years ago when the Grizzlies won 56 games, Ja only played, I think, 57 games that season. He missed, what is that, 25 games? But the Grizzlies had Tyus Jones, and that was able to kind of, they were able to weather the storm of him missing time. This year, they don't have Tyus Jones. And I'm a big proponent for Scottie Pippen Jr. As some people know, And people know I love Derrick Rose as well. As Joe Mullinax likes to remind the people,
Michael Cole loves himself some Derrick Rose.
I love Derrick Rose, but I'd be lying to you if I said I was 100% confident in either of them to fulfill the duties that Tyus Jones previously did, at least this upcoming season. So with that being said, that is a minor concern for me, and that all could come into play with Ja Morant's MVP odds and whatnot. But if Ja Morant, if he plays 70 games, so I think he blows that 10th odd spot out of the water. I see Ja being a top 7. Like, he finished 7th in that year, the 56 win season. Even though he only played 57 games, that was before the 65 game minimum crap came in or whatever. But he played 57 games that season and finished 7th. So I still think we haven't seen the best of Ja. I mean, have you been watching his posts a little bit lately, Joe? Like
I try to avoid Ja's social media at this point, if I'm being honest.
He's dropping the tea leaves to let people know. He's motivated. You know, there was what Mike Miller said. We haven't talked about that much on here, but Mike Miller said he's coming for it. You know, how soon they forget, right? And then on his Instagram page, he dropped a voiceover of a Grizzlies fan. I forget what the exact words were, but basically,
hopefully it wasn't me.
No, it wasn't you. It wasn't you.
Okay,
I can confirm.
I would have. My phone would have blown up if that had happened.
It actually was a fan basically saying like Ja's coming for y'all next year.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
Yeah, it was something like that.
Definitely wasn't me.
But the point with all that is, I think that Ja Morant is in a good spot. 10 preseason for me, honestly, is too low. I would say so. I would go into this season saying that Ja is a top 7 MVP candidate from the stats perspective. The impact is going to speak. I mean, honestly, the Tyus Jones factor in the past probably hurt his MVP candidacy. Now there's going to be a drop-off, like a bigger drop-off with Derrick Rose and Scottie Pippen Jr. As much as I like those two guys, like, I'm not blind to the obvious. There's going to be an obvious drop-off there. And with all that being said, it's probably going to make his MVP candidacy look even better.
The only place where I agree with your overall sentiment. It'll be a drop-off if they have to start in place of him, right? Like, that to me is and I will continue to make that distinction because we look at Tyus Jones in a way that the numbers don't support, especially his last season. The reason that they won so much when Ja was out is because Tyus, again, was the starter, right? It was Tyus Jones as the starting point guard for the Memphis Grizzlies, not Tyus Jones playing 12 to 14 minutes a night off the bench. That Tyus Jones, his last year in Memphis, was not particularly good. He wasn't in that role. So
not in the backup role, right?
I think that Scottie Pippen Jr., even Derrick Rose, the makeshift Marcus Smart, Desmond Bane rotations, and we can get into more of that as the month goes on. Mm-hmm. I think that can fairly easily replicate what Tyus Jones was. If you bring in Tyus to be the starting point guard, I'm not going to say what I said last time because people yelled at me, but I'm cool with Tyus Jones no longer being here. Okay, because I think I'm going to do you one better, partner, which might surprise you given, in the comments on YouTube, people point out how I'm almost anti-Ja. I don't agree with that. I think he's a top 5 MVP candidate because this is a man who is going to be given every opportunity to be exactly that. For the reason you just articulated, he's playing 34 to 36 minutes a game, period, flat, full stop. That's going to occur. If he logs 70-ish games, give or take a couple, and he's out there playing that much, we've seen him get all sorts of stats in a variety of ways. And I refuse to believe that if he's able to stay on the court, is not going to have a greater impact because for all his highs and lows, the good and the bad, there is something very tangible about when Ja Morant feels like he's been slighted or when he thinks there's a chip on his shoulder. Mm-hmm. Some people talk about it. Well, a lot of people talk about it, right? I'm mad. I'm going to prove everybody wrong. We have numerous examples in college, in the pros. Ja Morant doesn't just talk about it. He's about it, right? Yeah. And I think that's one of the best compliments you can pay him. All this talk from Mike Miller and others, it's not empty promises. The greatest ability is availability. If Ja Morant's on the court, I think he's going to try to destroy the NBA in the best possible way for the Memphis Grizzlies.
Yeah, one of the things he'll have going in his favor more than a lot of the players that'll be in the top 10, which is why your point of him being a top 5 candidate makes sense. Is he'll have the narrative factor. Mm-hmm. He'll have the factor that the Grizzlies were absolutely terrible last season. Terrible. And the fact that, wow, Ja comes back and boom, they go from a 6-19 team with Desmond Bain, Jaren Jackson Jr., and Marcus Smart in the lineup for a lot of those games to a top 4 Western Conference team. Because if he's the top MVP candidate, they're going to be in the top tier of the Western Conference.
Absolutely.
So he'll have that narrative in his factor. He'll have the redemption arc. You know, we as Americans, it's kind of been studied that Americans love redemption stories. That's why in Hollywood you have the old, what do they call it, the rags to riches type things, where you rise from the bottom and come to the top. And Ja, some people may say he's had his bottom in NBA. And now this is his chance to kind of ascend back up to the top of the NBA.
Damichael, maybe in a bit of an upset on this episode of Locked On Grizzlies. I think you said top 7. And again, top 5 obviously is included in top 7. I went bold. I said top 5. And that would make him a contender for first team All-NBA in this new positionless realm. Let us know in the comments what you think. Hit us up on X, at Damichael C, at Joe Mullinax. Where do you think Ja should be in terms of MVP odds going into next season? This is a wonderful opportunity to remind you of Locked On NBA. Make that your next listen after Locked On Grizzlies is over. It is a tremendous program where they cover all the ins and outs of everything that's going on in the NBA. You can subscribe to it on Apple, anywhere you get podcasts, just like Locked On Grizzlies. And you can also subscribe and check it out over on YouTube. So Locked On NBA, make that your second watch, your second listen once you are done with us here on Locked On Grizzlies. This episode of Locked On Grizzlies is brought to you by BetterHelp. We have to have non-negotiables when it comes to our self-care, right? When your schedule is packed with kids' activities, big work projects, and more, it's easy to let your priorities slip. Like, I'm going to be honest, Michael, I'm a football guy. One of my things that helps me go to sleep at night and kind of just turn off my brain is playing NCAA 25, right? Like, that game is so much fun. It's weird to turn off your brain with football when you focus on football so much like I do, but it just helps me. Or maybe another video game like MLB The Show. Whatever the case might be, it's just something that can just help me kind of close off my brain before I go to bed. We know it makes us happy, but it's hard to make time for things like that. Maybe it's exercise, whatever the case might be. If you feel like you have no time for yourself, non-negotiables like therapy are more important than ever. Make sure that if you're thinking of starting therapy, you give BetterHelp a try. Entirely online, designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. Fill out a brief questionnaire, get matched with a licensed therapist, or switch therapists at any time with no additional charge. Never skip therapy day with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/LockedOnNBA today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/LockedOnNBA. When we come back here on Locked On Grizzlies, we are moving on from Ja and looking at what might come next in terms of the Grizzlies roster. Stick around. Welcome back to Locked On Grizzlies. I am Joe Mullinax, joined by my co-host, Damichael Cole of the Commercial Appeal there in Memphis, Tennessee. Thank you so much for being with us, whether it's Apple, Spotify, YouTube, Amazon, wherever you get your podcasts. You being here with us is a present, and we appreciate you for it. Damichael, you also wrote about, over at the Commercial Appeal recently, what you felt the next move for the Memphis Grizzlies was going to be. And I want to stress, if you're not subscribed to the Commercial Appeal, you're not checking out everything Damichael does, you're not following the Memphis Grizzlies the right way. He's one of the best. I'm biased. He is the best at covering the Memphis Grizzlies, and I thoroughly enjoy his work. You talked about what you thought the next move might be. Mm-hmm. Where do you see this roster going? It seems kind of obvious if you're paying attention, but there's layers to this, as you kind of allude to.
Yeah, the main thing is, and we haven't really discussed it much, but as more details have come out with Luke Kennard and the contract, the $11 million number was more of kind of like a rounded up type of number.
Best case scenario almost.
Mm-hmm. And that's important to point out in this case because now the Grizzlies are just below the luxury tax line. This kind of, helps them because going forward, we've talked about it. Like it's going to be hard to avoid, like in future years. They can avoid it, but it's going to be hard to avoid and put together a completely competitive team with the likes of all these guys needing new contracts, which is something I talked about in this as well, which I'm sure we'll get to, because the next move necessarily doesn't have to be one in terms of the 15-man roster, but it's how the Grizzlies can plan for future moves, and one in particular, extension candidates. Santi Aldama at some point. And look, I don't think Santi Aldama, like, it's very early, but still, I don't think he would get an extension before the season at this point. But it's a talking point because of the fact that he's putting together a pretty good summer, starting off with what he did in Spain. Fourth team Spain in the Olympics, and the need for his skill set in Memphis. Like, if you look at the front court players, he has a particular skill set that the team, values. So there is some importance to his game, but you got to figure that out. But the most important one is one of your Wahoo guys, Mamadi Diakite.
Diakite.
Yeah,
Love that guy.
Yeah, what's his position going forward on this roster? And here's the thing for me. I started with the Luke Kennard point because you got to start with that, because everyone's probably just want to say, oh yeah, just cut him because it's not a lot of money committed to him, and go sign another guy for the minimum. Well, guess what? If you do that, exactly how I just outlined it, you cut Diakite and just go sign someone else for the minimum, you're in the luxury tax.
Yeah.
All this ducking and dodging that you've done just to stay right below it, you go right into the luxury tax. So, look, to me, in that case there, if you're trying to get rid of that contract or even another contract, a trade seems like the best possible option. But right now, that seems like the 15 guys. If they're trying to avoid the whole, they're doing all this look at the Luke Kennard contract. Like you align it that way to avoid the luxury tax. Clearly, they're trying to stay out of the tax and below the first apron. But also, what I said in that story is this is another important thing to remember. This is probably the most important thing to remember as we talk about this whole luxury tax and stuff conversation. You can move Mamadi Diakite and go get that minimum player right now, but your number for the Grizzlies official salary number, or whatever, how much money they spend this year, that number isn't finalized until the trade deadline. So let's say, what's a second apron team right now? The Boston Celtics or the Phoenix Suns, the two popular ones. Let's say the Boston Celtics or the Suns say, hey, look, we don't want to end this season in the second apron. You have until the trade deadline to make some moves to get it to knock that number down. And after the trade deadline, the number is completely final. So even though the Grizzlies could go out and get other guys and they would technically be over the luxury tax right now, and I say this, show, because remember what we said about Luke Kennard still. I think you pointed it out. You pointed out it's a 1-year deal, which means it is a tradable contract. You could trade an expiring contract, and that would put the Grizzlies well below the luxury tax in the case that they choose to do that. So that's kind of the way that I'm looking at it. At this point, I think any move that they'll make, as I said in the story, would be marginal, but everything will be geared towards kind of getting back below that tax line in February, unless they're just having a wonderful season and they just, suck it up.
I tell you what, we have, or at least I have, defended Robert Pera. Said he's one of the richest owners in the league. This guy's going to pay.
Is he being a cheapskate, Joe? Is he being a cheapskate right now?
I think that come visit me in February when we're around the trade deadline. And I think then, because it's important to point out, if you don't have to start the season in the tax, like the team as currently constructed, literally if they did nothing else, they're a top 4 team in the Western Conference. I have a really hard time seeing them as anything other than that as they currently stand. So if you are a top 4 team in the Western Conference, that stands to reason that you're a top 8 to 10 team in the NBA. And if he doesn't upgrade, right? Like, because there's always going to be a disgruntled star. There's always going to be somebody like a Kennard that maybe has an additional year of team control, or they're signed for another year. Yep. If you're not going to go and try to make the team better, right? Like maybe you tag whoever the 10th man winds up being, John Conchar and a couple of firsts, and you go upgrade your rotation. Go get a Derek White-esque kind of guy. If you don't go do that, then I'm going to give you a lot of crap because you said you were going to pay the tax when this team was good. And in that situation, they would be good. If you are a top 10 team in the NBA right now, what incentive do you have to go over the tax? I think that's a fair point to make. And it allows for them to maintain flexibility going into an unpredictable season, with this being the first year of everybody really kind of staring down those various aprons. So I agree it's going to be marginal. I don't see them doing anything big, but I will, like I said, revisit this 6 months from now. If they are not in the mix to try to improve this roster and go for it, if they're the 2 seed again, Robert Pera is going to get my ire, not Taylor Jenkins, because that at some point you put your money where your mouth is, literally.
You got to.
Let Damichael and I know what you guys are thinking about this next Memphis move. Again, we're thinking it's going to be small. I'm pretty confident, maybe they waive Diakite, but I'm not entirely sure for the exact reason Damichael just said. You waive him, and then you try to sign a vet minimum guy, it puts you over the tax. So if he's your 15th man, how much better or worse are you going to do at that spot? I think that's a fair question to ask. When we come back, we're going to end this episode shouting out Vince Williams Jr. and giving him some love. Looking forward to that coming up next here on Locked On Grizzlies. But first, this episode of Locked On Grizzlies is brought to you by FanDuel. I love sports. I love them so much that I never want them to stop. I'm sure you're the same way as me and Damichael, dear listener, dear viewer. But playoffs have completed, right? The Olympics are over in 5 days or so? It's coming down to the wire. We're getting fewer events. We're getting fewer games. Sports aren't sporting like we want them to. But FanDuel lets me keep the sports going whenever I want. All I have to do is open up the app and dream up bets anytime that I'm in the mood. This summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. You heard me right. Something for everyone, every day, all summer long. Head over to FanDuel.com and start making the most out of your summer, and do so with FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. When we return, Vince Williams Jr. gets some love on Locked On Fantasy Basketball. Stick around. Welcome back to Locked On Grizzlies. I am Joe Mullinax, joined to close this Wednesday edition of the show by Damichael Cole, my wonderful co-host, beat writer covering the Memphis Grizzlies for the Commercial Appeal there in Memphis, Tennessee. Damichael, we'll get out of here on this. You're a busy guy. You have a day job. I also have a day job, but it's not Grizzlies. So whenever there's a chance with our partnership that I can help out and fill in and do something that one of us can get done, I try to do it. And that was the case with Locked On Fantasy Basketball, hosted by the legendary Josh Lloyd, one of the most successful podcasts as part of the Locked On Podcast Network, not just the NBA side of things. And Josh talks about the Grizzlies with me, and he kept coming back to the name Vince Williams Jr., which I found so interesting because first off, it's evidence that he knows ball, right? Like, shout out to Josh Lloyd. He gets it. But it also is a reminder. We've talked so much about G.G. Jackson, and we've talked so much about Zach Edey. Vince Williams Jr. is, as he kind of has been throughout his basketball career, the forgotten man. But you could fairly easily argue, say God forbid something does happen to Ja or something happens to Marcus Smart, Vince Williams Jr. is probably the next guy in because of how versatile his skill set is, how he can do as a shooter, especially as a defender. He even mentioned playing Vince Williams Jr. at the foursome, which was really interesting to me. He was really impressed with the kind of game that Vince Williams Jr. has. I don't want to say that I took it for granted because I don't. I've followed Vince Williams Jr. Again, I was one of Mamadi Diakite. I actually know because he was a UVA guy. Vince Williams Jr. I actually knew because he was a VCU guy in the Richmond area where I live. So I was familiar with his game. He's doing far more than any VCU Rams fan would admit that they thought he was capable of in the pros. But I do think it's important to remember, Gigi's young and developing. That's great. Zach Edey's gigantic. He's going to fill that Adams role. Vince Williams Jr. is going to make a lot of the Grizzlies front office personnel look pretty smart. And it's a good thing because they missed so badly on picks like Zaire Williams.
Yeah, Joe, here's where I stand. I think right now, Vince Williams Jr. has the opportunity to be the unsung hero of the Grizzlies this upcoming season.
Absolutely. You could argue he already is.
Yeah, I mean, you can, but I want to factor in the fact that it is a small sample size that we've seen, and it isn't a sample size that is with John, Desmond Bain, and Jaren Jackson Jr. all being available. Now, with that being said, I think he can be the unsung hero simply because if Marcus Smart gets hurt, throw Vince Williams Jr. in the lineup, you shouldn't see a big drop off. Remember, the Grizzlies had Desmond Bain, Ja Morant, Steven Adams, and Jaren Jackson Jr. And they threw Zaire Williams in there as a rookie Zaire Williams, and bust off.
Zaire looked good at times.
I mean, he didn't have to do much.
He looked like a hooper at times.
He looked like a hooper. So you throw Vince Williams Jr. in there, like, so. And even if Des goes down, I think instead of Luke Kennard getting that call into the starting lineup, no, I put Vince Williams in the starting lineup with there too, alongside of Marcus Smart and Ja Morant. So he is that piece. And you could make the argument if something happens in the front court. I know you said Josh Lloyd talked about him playing the 4. Vince Williams Jr. is a good rebounder for his size, 6'4", 6'5", but he has a long wingspan. And he said something, and I'll close it out on this show, but because this spoke to me. You know, he basically said he was asked about his role when all the guys get healthy. Because if you were following Vince Williams towards the end of the season, you know, it wasn't much to talk about, and he had all this stretch of games where he would get 10 points, 5 boards, 5 assists, like just almost every game. And he was just telling us, he's like, man, I'm trying to get that triple-double. Like, we were on triple-double watch for Vince Williams Jr. That's not going to be the case anymore. But he understands that. At the end of the season, at his exit interview, he basically said, when these guys get healthy, when Ja, Dez, and Jaren are all around, the words he used was dirty work. He's ready to do the dirty work. That's Marcus Smart, type of energy right there. Like, you're okay, because basketball is it's very easy for egos to get involved in basketball. A lot of these guys come up through playing basketball their whole careers. They're one of the best players in the city, the state, on the team. And all of a sudden you get to the NBA, they're saying, hey, we only want you to do these 2 or 3 things well. And you're like, I can do way more than that. But Vince Williams has this understanding, I'm going to get over there, get my hands dirty, go grab those boards. I'm going to play great defense against Kevin Durant, Luka Doncic, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, and whoever else. So he understands his role. I think that's really important. He has the potential to be the unsung hero. And, I think it's a question, because you could make the same argument for Marcus Smart. But I think Vince Williams has a strong case to be that guy.
You've talked about in the past, Cam Spencer maybe being the Luke Kennard replacement. I've talked a little bit, Gigi Jackson maybe long-term if they don't come to terms with Santi Aldama. Vince Williams Jr. might be the Marcus Smart guy, right? Like, and Smart, I think, has a couple of years left on his deal still. But, Vince Williams Jr. is somebody that is really interesting to me because of the malleability of his game. He can play alongside so many different types of guys, and he doesn't have that ego. He's almost like our Josh Hart, right? Like, when you look at the New York Knicks, and you think, oh gosh, I want that, right? Like, that's the brass ring. 4 dudes just loving each other and playing basketball because they played as boys in Villanova, and the vibes are immaculate in New York right now. Yeah. They just are. The vibes used to be immaculate in Memphis, and Vince Williams Jr. is a guy who can kind of help them get back to that, because he can impact winning without impacting locker room chemistry. And that is so significant. Gigi Jackson, I think, will eventually get there. We've seen him grow so much as a player and as a person over the last year or so since he's joined the organization. But at the same time, he's still so young. And we've talked about the holes in his game and where he has to develop. That doesn't exist with Vince Williams Jr. And there's no thought process. He knows he can do more, but he's willing to do whatever the team wants him to do. And I think that maturation is going to be something that really sets him apart among the Grizzlies moving forward. How do you feel about Vince Williams Jr., dear listener, dear viewer? Let us know in the comments. Hit us up on X at Damichael C, for Damichael at Joe Mullinax. For me, I'm a big fan. I know Damichael is as well. How do you see Vince Williams Jr. fitting in moving forward? friendly reminder that unless some breaking news kind of situation happens here in the month of August, Michael and I slowing down our posting. It's every other day essentially, which means we'll be back together on Friday, again, barring some major news. Damichael, what are you thinking would be a fun thing for us to tackle on our Friday show?
I mean, if we want to keep it current, I'm looking at, Joe, I was thinking about this. I was watching the Olympics basketball on yesterday, right? And there are no Grizzlies players left. Like Santi was in group play.
Nope.
But Joe, let me say it like this. Going forward into 2028, right now, what the current Grizzlies roster could have possibly 6 guys playing in the Olympics. Possibly
I like that idea.
Possibly 6 guys. Like there are a lot of look. You can't tell me you didn't watch that Canada game out there, viewers. Everyone listening in, you watched that Canada game. You're seeing them just get out hustled on the glass, and you didn't think Zach Edey would have changed that game, or Brandon Clark would have changed that game.
Very true. I think you're onto something there. I like that. Maybe we can project the Memphis Grizzlies that'll be on the 2028 Olympics rosters. I like that a lot to close out the week and to kind of close out the Olympics, right, as they wrap up shop here over these last few days of the games. I think that's a wonderful reason to tune back in on Friday. Thank you guys so much for being with us on this Wednesday edition of the show. That's Damichael. I'm Joe. Make sure you're liking, commenting, rating, reviewing, subscribing, wherever you get your podcasts, Apple, Spotify, Amazon, YouTube. Make sure that you're making Damichael and I a part of your Memphis Grizzlies and NBA content consumption experience each and every time that an episode drops. Make sure that you are checking out Locked On NBA next. That should be your next listen, your next watch. Make sure you're checking out Locked On Fantasy Basketball with Josh Lloyd, featuring me, Joe Mullinax, as another listener watch today, talking Memphis Grizzlies from the fantasy basketball perspective. And most importantly, make sure you're back with us on Friday. For Damichael, I'm Joe. Stay locked in. Apple, YouTube, Spotify, Amazon, literally anywhere you get a podcast, you can get Locked On Grizzlies. Until next time, see you.